Yes, there we are, finally. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We have people logging in from all across the globe. Thank you so much for joining this session hosted by Bero. My name is Shakti Prasad. I am the head of content at Bero, and I run the Procurement Espresso magazine. I welcome you all to the 12th edition of Espresso Live event, an online thought leadership forum featuring procurement leaders and practitioners. Before I get started with the session, just a few housekeeping rules to be kept in mind. All the participants will be on listen only mode for the entire duration of the webinar. We'll take up the questions at the end of the presentation, but we would encourage our attendees to key in their questions anytime during the session. Please type them into the question box given in your control panel. There could be a lag of a few seconds in between the transition of slides, so please bear with us. If you have any difficulty in joining the webinar, please try to log back in or key in your queries in the Q&A box, and we will try to help you. Or for sometimes you may not, the audio may not be, audio may not work, or the video feed may be a bit jittery. If you're experiencing any such thing, just log back in. I mean, just close the window and log back in. I think that should work. Anyway, now I am happy to introduce Dr. Eloise Epstein. Dr. Epstein joins us from San Francisco. I think it's about 7:30 a.m. over there in California. I mean, that's the beauty of this digital world, isn't it, Eloise? It's like, I think it's 8 p.m. here in India and 7:30 in the morning over there. And today's topic is about digitalization. I mean, there are times when digital works well, like today, and there are times digital may not work well, and I'm sure you have a lot of stories to share with us. Anyway, so I'm happy to introduce Dr. Eloise Epstein. She is a digital futurist whose path-breaking ideas on how to design procurement systems make for a fascinating conversation. She works as a partner for consulting firm Kearney. She has worked on so many digital projects, and she has very strong views on the technology as it exists today. We will come to that. Eloise has recently, next slide, please. Sorry. Yeah. Eloise has recently released a book titled Trade Wars, Pandemics, and Chaos. How digital procurement enables business success in a disordered world. We truly live in a disordered world now. There's no doubt about it. So this webinar will primarily center around this book. It's a book talk, basically. So I have selected some quotes from the book for discussion. The book has many quotable quotes, and it was a tough choice for me, Eloise, to pick and choose which one to feature here. Anyway, I think I'm kind of done with my long drawn introduction. Thank you so much for joining the session today, Eloise. I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for such a lovely introduction. And I absolutely am happy to be here in this digital world, in this globalized digital world, for this discussion today.
Indeed. Next slide, please. Yeah. So as I said, we are. I've chosen some quotes from the book. So all the quotes you see here are from Eloise's book. So Eloise, the first thing that struck me was there was a deep dissatisfaction. You had expressed your deep dissatisfaction, with the current set of procurement technology. So there are two quotes that I have, pasted here on the slide. First quote is, "What I'm reflecting is a deep dissatisfaction from customers of the procurement technology market." And then you go on to say, "We have to imagine a new future in which procurement done well will optimize costs, reduce risk, drive innovation, and advance ESG efforts." So why is this dissatisfaction, and what is the sentiments that you're hearing from your customers?
Well, that's a great question. I think, well, I like to blame consultants, although that they're not the only ones at play here. So I'll just take you back. I started my career in procurement in the early 2000s at the first .com explosion. And so I have watched this entire digital procurement world evolve back before there was really procure to pay, back before there was source to contract as we know it today. And quite frankly, by about 2010, 2012, we had a lot of acquisitions going on and consolidations, and I kind of was ready to walk away from procurement and say, hey, we did it. We solved procurement. And if that would have been true, I'd be teaching history at a university right now and not taking everybody to task for what is essentially shoddy work. The first section of my book is really all how we got into this mess.
Yeah.
And Len, who wrote the foreword, basically said, you have a lot of villains in the first section. Are you the hero? And I'm not the hero, but I just decided to paint the picture. I had to actually tone it down a little bit. So if you think the first section is hot, that's the toned down version. And I think, and I'll just say, just to sort of close that point out, is you had consultants or systems integrators, you had analysts, and you had the tech providers all creating this, and to some degree they still do that, this sort of, they're all benefiting from one another and perpetuating the status quo. Because
Mm,
the status quo in 2020, when I wrote the book, 2021, 2022, that like, there is no normal anymore. This
mm.
is how do we operate in this disruptive world, and that's the starting point. And anything we've done over the last 20 plus years is not it's helpful, but it's not the way we're going forward.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So in fact, you're being ad dropped in the middle of many implementations that were going wrong, and in fact, you told me, and you in fact written some good anecdotes in the book. Anyway, so next slide, please. Yeah. So this again quote caught my attention, Elias. It's about the procurement software market. The era of seven-figure procurement software deal is over. I mean, you are very emphatic about that, and you have written that in the book. And then again, this one, today's supply chains run on software that was designed in late 1990s. So ERP was cool, it was new and innovative before 2000, as you mentioned. You started your career back then, but then the business has changed dramatically in that time, and looks like, uh, you know, as you said, the status quo is continuing. So why do you say the era of the seven-figure procurement software deal is over? I mean, I feel it's a bit contrarian.
Well, so what I mean by that is the era where we write one big check to one big vendor. And I
Ah,
think
okay.
it's important to note that I'm working on another book right now, my next book, and I'm basically tackling ERPs in the same manner, because we have systems, source to pay systems is very much this book. My new book is very much ERP systems. If you actually look at the business environment that has evolved or changed, it's no longer what these systems were designed for. And
Mm,
especially source to contract, where you would just buy, fill in the blank, doesn't matter who, I'm not going to pick on anybody today,
yeah.
but you can fill in the blank, and the way that tool, you go back to when it was designed, I don't care which tool it was, they've all designed, they all, their origins go back to the 2010s, the mid 2010s. That's the businesses that they were serving back then are not the businesses they're serving today. We have like big corporates just doing major acquisitions and divestitures. You have the rise of private equity companies. You have separations now. You have all kinds of moving pieces in the way businesses operate. And by the way, that all of, let's call it 2000, when we had the sort of rise of globalization. Well, globalization is being challenged right now by all these
Mm,
macro disruptions, not the least of which is political instability. So how can you run a global business the way, with the tools you developed in a different era? You just can't
yeah.
do it. And oh, by the way, the digital technology has changed dramatically. in the 2000s, we didn't have early 2000s, we didn't have smartphones. We didn't really have Amazon or AWS or Azure as we have today. And correspondingly, we didn't have people with the skills we have today. So and that's just, that's the short answer. If you take all these things together, how can you just go with one single vendor? It's anachronistic.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. In fact, that's one theme that kept recurring in your book, Eloise, where you say uh, smartphones have proliferated everywhere, and why is procurement uh, software still running out of your laptops and desktops and not seamlessly, on your phone? In fact, you offer a vision, so how it should be. We'll come to that. So next slide, please.
And can I just add, well, as we go to the
Yeah,
next
yeah,
slide, I
sure,
had a
sure.
CPO say, why isn't there an app for procurement? Just
Mm,
just very simply, why is there not an app for procurement? And I
mm,
think that's, well, he was joking. I think that there's a lot within that statement of what he's really saying, or what his users are saying, is, why is this not simple? Why can we not just do this and make it less friction, or frictionless for the user?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So in fact, this was funny. It's about starting the digital journey. So you say companies that don't have any procurement technology, basically the ones who have a blank sheet of paper, are in a best position to achieve procurement excellence, as opposed to someone who may have, say, 3 or 4 ERP systems. And you have seen, I think you mentioned there's one company which had dozens because of M&A and all that. Uh, so can you throw some light on it? Why do you think it's better to start afresh, from a clean slate?
Yeah, so there's several reasons why this is. First of all, there's a lot of technical debt in terms of legacy source to pay. And if you start fresh, and there are companies that are starting fresh, and that or either they're new, they didn't have a procurement department, or they're separating, then you can actually start today and build for the future, instead of having to migrate yesterday to today to
Mm,
tomorrow.
mm,
I work with companies that want to leapfrog, but that's not, and that's a good thing to do, but it's not easy, because you have these sunk costs, you have this technical debt, and you have to really move it. The other piece that is really key to this is processes are design are inter connected with your technology. So
mm,
I would
mm,
argue many of today's complicated, convoluted processes come about because the technology 5 or 10 years ago did not do what it was supposed to do, or what
mhm.
it was at least sold to do. So what do you do when the technology fails? You create new processes, you add more technology, you add more people. And so you have all these organizational complexities because your technology didn't work 5 years ago, 10 years ago,
Okay.
two
Mm,
years ago. So if you're starting with a clean sheet of paper, and give me this system, this brand new system, then, and with all these sort of good capabilities, then I can actually take what is a 15-step process and make it 2 steps or 3 steps,
mm,
and
mhm.
get better compliance, better analytics, better, fill in the blank benefit, because I'm not carrying all that old ways of working.
Yeah, so this process designing, it keeps going on and on in many companies. The designer process, they tweak it. So is it because of the way? I mean, I'm just trying to figure out, what is causing this. Of course, you said the technology was not designed, so in a way they are forced to invent a process that is convoluted. But let's assume that there is let's say there is a system that can address some of the needs, but still the processes are put in place, and sometimes the stakeholders would complain, what, it's very onerous for me to uh, go through the requisition. So uh, what is going wrong? Is it primarily technology, or is it something to do with design thinking? Some kind of a vision is lacking. Where do you think is going wrong? Because there has to be a mix of both somewhere, right?
Well, I think there's many things that are going wrong. So one is the technology. And essentially what we have right now is dumb technology. And I don't mean that pejoratively, but it's not smart technology. That's a better way to
Mm,
say it.
mm,
It's not smart.
mm, mm,
So when I go into Amazon or Google or Facebook, their intelligence, their algorithms, I hate to use that term, but they are using data to manipulate my behavior.
mm,
They're suggesting something I should buy, something I should watch, something I should
mm,
do, something I should click on. That
mm,
that's very sophisticated technology. Well, but I'm not having to think as much because I'm not, as soon as I log into Netflix, I'm overwhelmed with a curated set of list I things of things I
mm,
should watch. Well, I don't
mm,
have to really use the search bar anymore because it's just constantly feeding me. And if you really want to see that to the nth degree, look at TikTok. They have their algorithm is so finely tuned that it basically addicts people, and people just kind of get lost in TikTok. And I don't mean that as a joke in any way. So we have this very sophisticated technology, and yet I'll go into any requisition system, show me any requisition system, and I will show you a system that I have to know exactly what I'm looking for. I better not make any mistakes, any spelling mistakes. And
mm,
oh, by the way, even if I do that right, it's going to show me way more results than I can process visually. It's going to make me click and click and click and click. And if you actually watch a requisition tool demo, you can
mm,
just see very clearly all the steps that they're putting on the user, because it's as if they think that just because you can do it, it makes it pleasurable to the end user. But the question you have to ask is this pleasurable to me? The other thing I write is dashboards are dead. They're useless.
mm,
Other
mm,
than for a few finance people, and it's the same thing. I see this every week, because there's a lot of risk companies I've been talking to lately. They show me all of this data that they put into a dashboard. And it always, without fail, the first thing I tell them, well, I know you did a lot of hard work. I know this is technically proficient, but this is utterly useless to me because you're not telling me anything. You're making me, you're just pulling data that I could have gotten in an Excel file, and you're putting it into a single place. That's fine, but that's not risk management or ESG management. You've just taken some data and pulled it together. We need to use that, get to that intelligence, and actually bring this together. So I'm sure I went wildly off your question, but that's what's missing.
yeah,
And then if I could just make one other point, I know I've gone on, but
yeah. Sure, sure.
is then you have people that are not choosing to streamline these processes. They're using this as an excuse for mediocrity. And at the end of the book, I challenge the talent side of this, the people side of this, because you have people that are incented to design complicated processes and to do actually slow things down. And
Mm,
that's not digital either. So you have to look
mm.
at it from the people and sort of the lacking in the tools.
Okay, that's great. In fact, you mentioned Amazon. That's a very popular catchphrase. I mean,
Yes.
I keep often hearing procurement teams. The opinion is divided. Some teams say, "Well, I don't want to design an Amazon." Some teams say, "Well, it's nice to have an Amazon-like experience." But what is it that preventing from a structural point of view for teams to create an Amazon-like experience? Because it's not like the technology is kind of like, because there is Amazon already, right? So there is Amazon already, and we can create a catalog and create a nice UX feel. So even with the available technology, where an Amazon which is already up and running in a successful manner, why is it that teams are still not able to create a full-fledged Amazon-like experience, even with
Well, I
available
think
tech? Mm,
Yeah, when we talk about user experience, we're not talking about, again, this intelligence, because it should know, when I log into a system, it should know who I am, it should
mm,
know what
mm,
I bought, it should make recommendations.
Mm.
I agree with you that the Amazon example is overdone, and I've been using that for like 6 or 7 years. So even I'm tired of it.
Yeah.
Although to be fair, we haven't really moved beyond that. But
Mm.
what I used to use early on when I would use that example, CPOs would say, well, I don't want my users to buy more things. And that's
Mm.
true. But I can use that same intelligence to actually get them to buy where we want them to buy. We
Mm.
can manipulate the behavior without them even knowing. And so that becomes important when we talk about sustainability or using diverse suppliers. Why would you not put in a system that foregrounds diverse suppliers that meet the
Mm.
qualifications or
Mm.
sustainable products? If you just show me the 100% recycled printer paper, well, I'll just make that choice. That's the first one because I'm lazy, and boom, done. And oh, by the way, we're now using recycled paper. We're making green choices, and we don't even know it because we don't have to make it a big deal. And I would argue until it becomes intuitive in the systems, your user adoption is always going to be a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, in the book you had mentioned, the user does not even have to know that they are maybe purchasing a laptop or a printer from a diverse supplier. Just feed it in, serve it up, and if they purchase, well done. As a procurement, you achieve your target in the back end, and the user doesn't even have to know. I think that's a very interesting way to look at things, Eloise. Anyway, so I think we are stuck on this slide. Can we move on, please? Next slide. Yes. So the foundation is very important, because what really struck me was, even though you're proposing a radical, so-called radical viewpoint, you're still keeping the basics intact. You're saying, fine, the foundational capability should still be a P2P system, which will help you to manage spend. So, what is your opinion on the current P2P system? Is it? I know it's doing its job to a large extent, but I think your grouse is mostly that it's not able to scale up to the future world.
Yeah. So we take this again. If you go back to the blank sheet of paper, somebody separating, somebody doing and creating a new company. Like day one, you need to be able to process purchase orders and do invoicing and get payments, like and do requisitions. That is like, if you're not doing that, then you're not actually operating. You're
Mm,
going to be, well, you can operate, but it's not it's not
mm,
going to be good. So P2P onto itself is a key capability you need day one. Now we can add sourcing and contracting and sort of all the other analytics and whatnot. But if you don't get sort of this P2P or rec to pay on day one, then you just fundamentally can't operate. Now we can go philosophically and take apart P2P and sort of do other things, and we can look at smart contracts or catalogs, smart catalogs. So there's other things, but if we don't have the ability to raise requisitions, to do purchase orders, to do invoicing, and to do like pay suppliers
mm,
rather, then
mm,
we're not actually doing our job.
mm,
So my argument is if you just take that chunk and call it important, a core piece of the platform, and then you actually go deep into some of those areas, because when you get to payment, there's new solutions around identity verification, because fraud's on the rise, entity resolution, working capital optimization, all these components. Like, you can make just P2P really robust.
mm,
I would then argue that a good P2P system would underpin your ERPs, and you start to move some of that stuff out of some of the payment stuff out of your
mm,
ERPs. But
mm.
that's a different discussion. But you could
Yeah.
start to see that if you have this capability to do really good, invoicing and payments and whatnot, it actually can be very sophisticated. And so that's good. But then that's not enough. And as I think we'll get to in a minute, a good P2P system, like there are some good systems out there, but the problem is they then try to upsell you on all the other modules. But
Yeah.
once you get beyond P2P, and again, P2P is its own big thing, sourcing has, you need at least 5 sourcing tools and at least 2 or 3 contracting tools and 2 or 3 other tools of this. And, like you have all these other capabilities, and the mistake that has been made is we have assumed that you could get one source to pay system, and that doesn't work. So
Mm.
I really wanted to focus on the primacy of P2P, and then how do we stitch everything else into that?
Yeah. So end to end is over basically. I mean, it's not
Oh,
really
yeah,
possible.
put a fork in it.
Okay. Next slide, please. Yeah. So this again, it caught my attention, Eloise, because until I read this, so let me read out this quote: this S2C versus P2P. So you said, or rather you wrote, it's easy to garner a lot of wins with S2C activities, but operationalizing those savings require P2P. So striking that balance is a trick.
So
But no, so my point was, sorry, so my point was, I thought it'll flow seamlessly. I mean, you have S2C, well, and then you have P2P because people are doing it, but you have seen a lot and you feel that somewhere the twain is not meeting. So what's happening there? Why is there a breakdown between this S2C and the P2P?
well, the S to C and the P to P was always like, that's why it looked so good in 2010 or 2008 or 2012.
Mm,
It like,
mm,
yes, it should be integrated. Yes, you should go from one end to the other. But
mm,
there's a couple of problems that emerge, not the least of which is nobody actually delivered that. It was
mm,
kludgy and difficult, and um, but one vendor can't do all those capabilities. I think that's what it
mm,
comes down. We have to just admit that, because
mm,
you could be good on P2P, but you're going to struggle in source to contract. And even if
mm,
you did okay in source to contract, when you get to say contracting, well, you have a different trend now where legal departments need to support procurement and the commercial side or the sales side. So you need
mm,
better tooling, and whatever a procurement provider has built for contract management, it's not good enough for legal. So like this is where it gets to being in a complex enterprise, is you can't just design an end-to-end tool for procurement absent connectivity to the rest of the enterprise. And you see that with AP when you get to payment and finance. So you'll start to get some crossover and gaps there. You see that with sort of all elements of paying suppliers and even onboarding suppliers. And this is why working in a modern enterprise, especially one that's huge and complicated and many ERP systems, you can't just come along and put in a source to pay platform and say, well, this is how it's going to be, because that's just not how it works. And then there's of course the fact that the providers have not delivered on that full integrated piece,
mm,
and there's just elements that are old. Like when we think about contract repositories, if you're not talking about contracts as data, then you're giving me basically digital versions of paper contracts, which tell me
mm,
nothing.
mm,
It tell me
mm,
nothing until I break the contract or do contract analytics or PDF conversion and then
mm,
contract analytics. That's all fine. That's all good. Those are things we need to do. But if you put a hard line there and said that's the past,
mhm,
if you're not deploying a contract as data system today, then why
mhm,
am I fooling around with your tool? Because you're not designing back to that blank sheet of paper. We need to be able to move forward, because contract as data, where you're not actually, that's not a document. It's not a document that I,
correct.
digitally sign. It's actually data. Then that's just one example, and we could go through every piece of the procurement value chain and sort of point out these gaps.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So moving on, next slide. Yeah. So this again is my favorite, Eloise. So I think gone are the days when we talk about CPO and the CFO camaraderie, right? So I think with the pandemic and the way procurement teams have dealt with the disruption, I know it was like mostly crisis management, but still most of them pulled off successfully. And we are seeing instances where the CFOs are also appreciating the procurement teams in their annual reports and analyst earnings calls, etc. But I think the new dynamics is CIO, the between the CPO and the CIO, because procurement is buying a lot of technology and they need to implement it. So working with the CIO and the internal IT team becomes paramount. So we are moved away from CPO CFO dynamics to CPO CIO dynamics, and where you have mentioned under no circumstances should procurement cede its power to IT. And we see this, right? There's a fight for resource, deadlines getting missed, and tempers fraying. And there is only so much an IT organization can do. And by its nature, procurement are not tech people, so they cannot implement technology. They can buy, but they cannot implement technology. So, what's your reason behind, this interesting statement, this assertive statement that under no circumstances should procurement cede its power to IT?
Yeah, so if you're going to put in whatever procurement system, don't you think procurement knows what procurement needs, not what
Mm,
IT needs? The
mm,
idea that you would start a conversation by saying we're an SAP shop, so we're going to go with SAP, or we're an Oracle shop, we're going to go with Oracle. Like, wait a minute, we didn't even talk about what the business requirements are. And
mm,
IT doesn't do that for marketing. They don't do that for sales. They don't do that with HR. They don't. So why do they get to push procurement around? That's unacceptable.
mm,
I refuse
mm,
to buy that because we need
mm,
to understand what procurement needs to do. Because, oh, by the way, procurement became pretty important back in March of 2020. And IT wasn't telling us what to do when the pandemic broke out and what we needed to
mm,
do to work with suppliers and figure out where we were exposed in our contract, where we were exposed geographically, et cetera, et cetera. Only when we're not in a crisis does IT come, open the door and say, well, hey, well, what about SAP or what about Oracle? It's like, no, like we'll contact you when we need you, and you can go implement what we decide. And
mm.
that, I mean, that's as extreme as it needs to be. Now, what I will say, that said, having a good relationship, building a relationship with the CIO, if the CIO is willing to go on the journey with you, then yes, it should be a great partnership, just like it should be a partnership with legal, with finance, and so forth. But if you're just going to say, oh, well, we're an SAP shop, we chose SAP, you're basically marking the date. Well, the moment you say that and you believe that is the moment it's just a matter of time until you leave. And that's not good for the enterprise either. And it's not good for IT because all you end up with is a tool that is deployed that nobody uses and actually people hate. So that like we have to remember that we are the stakeholder. So many
Mm,
times we're supporting other stakeholders in their purchasing of software, but in this case it becomes us as the stakeholder. And the only other thing I would say is with all these startups and these precise capabilities, it's a lot less dependent on IT. And that's why I
yeah.
argue, I think we'll get to it in a second, but for a sales force for procurement, IT only cares about that their Salesforce is deployed for the commercial side of the house, and then everybody can add all the apps or do all the things. We need that for procurement because we
Mm.
can't have IT in the middle of all these. Whether I'm using X tool for spend visibility or Y tool for spend visibility, that's not their purview. They need to go back to doing whatever it is they're doing.
Yeah, correct. In fact, you had mentioned the CRM tool, how with successful and marketeers. Even though as a marketeer, I do have my own issues with some of the CRM tools. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't want
yeah,
to. I
no,
don't know.
yeah.
But still, see. I mean, one important point that you had raised was CRM tool sits outside of the ERP system,
Yeah.
right? So, do you
But
think?
should it? That's a question, though. Should it? because
It
I'm
sure
not
did.
so
Yeah.
sure in today's day and age where you have this balance of trade question issue and
Mm,
you actually have insights that procurement can bring to your sales side. So like I just have to point out, this is part of my new book, is like, well, we can't just assume that we're selling to customers that are independent from our suppliers, because in many cases
mm,
our suppliers are customers and or competitors. So you
mm,
have these very unique relationships, and so we have to really start thinking about relationships that
mm.
way.
Yeah, yeah, correct. Okay, so moving on, next slide, please. Yeah, so this is the crux of your book, Eloise, so which I think we can maybe discuss this bit in detail. So you talk about the need for an ecosystem, basically need for a complete rethink. So this is just a screenshot from your book. I'm not sure if all of it is visible, but anyway, so basically the idea here is to break it down like a 2 minute, like a 30-second elevator pitch for our audience. So we have a phone. So, this is a phone. So basically you're saying there has to be an equivalent of an operating system like an Android or an iOS, which can act as the backbone on which apps can be built and can be used seamlessly by the stakeholder, by the business. And procurement would just need to figure out, what kind of apps to be installed. In fact, there's one diagram. I think this is the one. Maybe it's another diagram where it's like you had mentioned so many solutions out there, and you're saying actually, what, a company may not need anything more any more than 5 or 6 of it. So 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 this so ecosystem. You're saying that should where we should move forward to. So why don't you explain this ecosystem concept and more importantly how far we are in realizing this dream.
So what I've done, and you're referring to the spider chart, where I've taken the
Yeah, spider
procurement
chart.
value chain, source to pay, and I blew it out, not up,
Yeah.
but blew it out. And I've come up with all this complexity to map all the innovation that's happening. Because what we've learned is that we need precise capabilities for supplier vetting, for diverse supplier reporting, like all these different capabilities. I gave you the ones about payment and contracting earlier, requisitioning. So we have all these capabilities. As we just talked about, one tool is not going to give me source to pay. Can't do that. So we need to be able to have a platform that connects all of these capabilities.
Hmm.
But as 98% of our users don't even need to know or care about that. And back to our discussion about what Amazon experience, I don't care what's happening in the background. I just want this very simple user interface, and I want to be
Hmm.
able to, sourcing, do plunk the sourcing button. And so this image represents how I know we will have succeeded when we can
Hmm.
have infinite complexity in the background,
Hmm.
and it's distilled down into a very pleasurable user experience that is easy to use. And that's what you're seeing here. And by the way, this is not just a mobile interface into yesterday's technology. This is truly, I can add, if I need to add a different type of risk monitoring, I can just go to the equivalent of the App Store, plunk it, and do that. And it adds to it, and I have this very custom user interface. And more importantly, I have that chat or that the voice interface to help me guide me through what I need to do, to tell me things I need to, or to allow me to ask questions of perhaps the data. And in the example, I have a requisition example in the book of a chatbot interaction. And you had sort of brought this up earlier with the laptop
Yeah.
requisition, is I don't care who we've contracted with. I want a laptop and I want to know what the approved laptop models are. So why can I not go to Teams or Slack and say, what are our approved laptop models? Like that should
Hmm.
be the lowest possible bar. Why are you not telling me that? Why can you not provide that? Why are you making me search for that information? And by the
Mm,
way, if I select, one of those laptops, why are you not making recommendations for privacy screen, for an extra adapter, for a laptop bag, all of these things that I would naturally want, but I may not think about in that moment. And that's what I talk about intelligence. And so you take all this complexity of the capabilities and this intelligence, it meets in this image right here in the screen. That was more than 30 seconds, but that was
no, no, absolutely.
semi-obvious.
In fact, the laptop example, as I mentioned, you said you can also build in your diversity goals and ESG goals in there, and then maybe one purchase you can send it to a diverse supplier, another purchase maybe to a normal vendor thereby. So everything can be built in. So one question I have here, Eloise, so when you say a backbone, an iOS and Android type of an operating system, uh, do you think, do you mean to say that it would still sit in an iOS environment and then you open that app and then get to do all of these things? Or is it an altogether a separate system, separate from whatever we have currently? Why I'm asking that question is, uh, like you rightly said, there's a new generation coming in. They are all glued onto their smartphones, and we should be able to run procurement on on the smartphone. So, what kind of dynamics do you foresee? Does it still have to sit in an iOS or Android, or is it separate?
Yeah, so I think we have to separate two things. So there's the platform that
Mm,
is it's connected to your ERP, it's connected to your CRM. Like there's the platform of the ability to do rec to pay. There's the ability to do all these integrations. There's the ability for intelligence, and there's the user experience. And the user experience should be delivered through existing channels. So by that, I mean through iOS or Android. It should be delivered through Teams or Slack. What it should
mm,
not be is a proliferation of logins and websites and all these different places. I just want to go to one place, and even in the, whether it's in Office or in the communication tools, Teams or Slack, or in sort of a app that you might develop within iOS, but it should not be its own operating system. Like you're not going to have an iPhone for procurement. It has to be built
okay.
into existing core technologies.
Okay, got it.
Otherwise,
I think,
it's a maintenance and a security headache.
yeah, correct. Okay, I think we are done with our discussion. Maybe we can start taking up audience questions. Is it next slide? Yeah, I think we are done. Okay, so this question is from Don Clock. My observation is that procurement people are not very good at selling, that is quote unquote, very good at selling a new needed system. So what type of talent or training does procurement need to do?
I'm glad you mentioned that. That you asked that. That's the topic of my next book, is really
Uh,
to get into some of these capabilities, because part of the reason IT acts like a bully is because procurement doesn't have the language, confidence, capabilities. It depends. I'm not casting a wide net, but when they don't have the confidence to push back or to, as you sell, then it's easy to get overrun by by IT. And so yes, all of this needs to be developed. And I tend to work with clients that are extreme leaders or extreme laggards. And the extreme leaders have people that are managing a digital procurement program and building teams. And I wrote about British Telecom's procurement garage or digital garage, and sort of really investing the resources and building the organizational competency around digital. So how do you do that? well, I could do a whole nother webinar on that, and that again will be the topic of my next book. It's on my whiteboard here. So I'm very much pushing on that because that is a gap that needs addressing.
Yeah, yeah, that's correct. So next question is from uh, Praveen Baleka. So Praveen says, we have S2C implemented in few regions. However, we are struggling to implement it in complex regions. Could you please share a few
Yep.
ideas how S2C process should be standardized?
Yeah, so this is the this is where it all goes wrong, because we come up and we do this with a North American, European
Mm,
centric view of, because that's where the technology comes from, and oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, and so we just start to take this thing and we want to standardize it, we want to stamp it in every geography. But
mm,
as the question says, rightly says, it's more complicated, and I would argue that you need to adjust this idea of a single standard. I don't like the terms centralization and I don't like standardization, because in the real world, those two concepts fall apart very quickly. And they're
mm.
also, it's very easy to poke holes in. And when you poke holes in them, then you get bad performance. So you have to really have the flexibility, that backbone that allows you to give Latin America a different set of capabilities that's tied into your backbone, but is not the same source to contract system that you put in Europe or in the Netherlands. And you should have, in some ways, two vastly different interfaces, workflows for any 2 or 5 or 6 or 12 different regions. It's not to say you're going to do 12 different systems. It's going to have a backbone system with the flexibility to do the customizations to meet that geography. And sort of to bring it back to what I was saying earlier, is that if you don't, when you're trying to put the same tool into every region, you're setting yourself up for failure, because there's just too many nuances. And you just got to go back to, we need to be able to raise purchase orders, do invoicing, do payments, and then ideally get some contracts and get all the other things. But the way you do that in Brazil is different than the way you do that in Chile, which is different than the way you do that in Mexico, which is different than the way you do it in Germany. And we have to acknowledge that, because we pretend, and you'll read lots of quote unquote best practices that say one system, one approach everywhere. And your experience, and everybody I talk to, the experience falls flat when you get to different geographies. I mean, look at
Yeah,
Brazil. Just for like the Brazilian government, manages all invoices that come in to make sure they're getting the requisite tax. So like that's a totally different use case than like how we do it in the United States. So like it's
yeah,
just like to think that you would have a single system that could accommodate two vastly different use cases. We just have to be real. Let's quit pretending.
so the
I hope
marketeers
that I
maybe
hope that
they,
helped.
yeah, I think the marketeers maybe they did a good job. I mean, it's bad for procurement, but looks like the marketing message
Right?
was I think they aced that one. Anyway, so this is again a very
Yeah.
interesting very interesting question from anyways from Daniel Rodriguez. We are looking for a portal to improve the customer experience and digital interaction with our external customers who require procurement services as well as suppliers. But the current P2P doesn't have a strong portal to interact with users outside our four walls. Uh, what approach would you recommend?
First, I would well, you definitely need to read my book. Portals are old technology. So what
Yeah,
you really want to think about, and I'm not picking on you, I'm very
sure.
anti-portal. And so what you really need to think about is user experience and sort of process, these dynamic process flows. So companies like Zip, ServiceNow, is starting to get into this, even Pega a little bit, where you're actually architecting different user experiences and process flows through your tools, and they're doing a lot of this abstraction that I was talking about. So
Hmm.
you might say, for this customer, this external customer, you want them to come here, 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 and see, be able to interact with these three systems. Well, you
Hmm.
can draw that out in these systems that I just talked about as, three objects on the screen, and then it'll render that experience for that person. You give them the credentials, and that's the path they see. And then I might go to this other sort of external person that needs, and could be a supplier even, and say, here are the capabilities we need to expose to them, and this is how they don't even have to take many paths. They can do this one place and get all the information they need. And so you're not building, the problem with a portal is sort of like I was on the last question. Portals are one size fits all, whereas these intake or intake to process capabilities overlay whatever core systems you have and sort of keep the user in that user experience bubble without exposing them to all the systems.
Okay, that's good. In
Hopefully that
fact,
made sense,
Daniel,
but at a minimum, look at those tools and you can start to see that you're interacting with the tools, not the portal and not the core systems.
yeah, I think Daniel is happy with your answer because he just messaged excellent, thanks. Okay, so moving on. Next question. I think it feels like a very philosophical question. Anyways, this is from Silas Bird. Uh, I'm inside a big SAP shop at Fortune 100. We are overreached to SAP in many ways, but also have 27 other ERPs in use across the globe. I'm totally on board, understanding of, and following everything discussed today. But I'm not the CPO, and I find myself spending much of my days wondering where to start on this journey. What's a potential first step, given that I don't have a blank sheet of paper to start from?
So you're the client I talk to every day. I'm going to change my title from futurist to procurement therapist, because this is very much I hear this is the problem I hear all day. Um, so yeah, and I make people feel better, or at least I try to. So I this is you have to understand you're in for a long journey, and there's two parts to this. One is if you have leaders that have just abdicated their responsibility to IT, there is a question about whether you're in the enterprise that you want to be working in, because when you start to get inspirational leaders, and they're all over LinkedIn, you start to see a gravitation to those people. They've created an orbit, like Cyril, who I featured in the book at British Telecom, has created an orbit of people and companies around himself. And I'm not saying everybody can just go and leave, but if you want to think about the talent shortage, and you have to ask yourself, where's the talent going? So that's just sort of background to the question. But the other piece of this is you have to do your due diligence and understand all the capabilities. And I would certainly recommend reading my book. And for those that want a copy, I'm happy to send you a copy if you just reach out to me. But essentially start to understand, because I go through in detail and show where these benefits cases fail, and start to look at where there's weaknesses in the SAP platform or Oracle or whoever, because they're there, and people like myself, and there's others that are writing about and exposing these areas, whether it's ESG or risk or some of these other non-core ERP or non-core SAP/Oracle modules. And that's where you can start to find the benefits that can never be delivered in SAP. Like SAP planning is generally known to be pretty not as where it needs to be compared to some of these startups. So, and I know the question was not about planning, but all of a sudden you can see the emergence of all these startups in planning, and all of a sudden they are becoming much more, they're getting a toehold where it used to be SAP. It's now these other solutions like Era and O9 and Kinaxis and Blue Yonder. they've kind of disrupted that part of the SAP's market, and so you see that in procurement, and there's again the whole value chain. You can start to find that, and you could start to surface benefits that are that sort of layer on or augment your existing SAP environment, and then over time you're not gonna nobody's gonna blow up an SAP system. Even my next book's not gonna call for the blowing up of that. But if you can build a team with the capabilities, then you can start to make headway until these macro changes that I'm talking about really come to play. By the way, they are coming. The conversations we're having now versus 6 or 7 years ago, vastly different. It used to be a disruptor. Now my philosophy is pretty mainstream and
Mm.
bought into by most companies.
Yeah, of course. So next question is from Frank Defum. I really find this a wonderful idea, but today I'm facing that implementation of these tools are very expensive. So how can you guarantee a real good ROI to convince the board of directors? So this ROI question keeps coming up, right, Eloise? So each time you go and want to buy technology procurement, there's always it's running at the back of the mind. Hey, how can I show an ROI? I don't want this to go wrong. And what if I'm held responsible for a faulty implementation? So how to overcome that?
Well, but again, if you're asking for $10 million, then you better show me a good ROI. But
Mm.
if I'm asking for $10,000, or in some cases, no money, and so again, my British Telecom, they're paying very little money. And so then the risk is very low. So you almost have guaranteed upside. There's no downside, especially if it's low dollar amounts. And if it's $10 million, what's the timeline on return? It's going to be in years. It's going to be measured in years. So if you give me $10,000 and 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and if I can't show you value, then my risk reward, like that's not a board level thing. That's just business as usual. That's like a minimal like rounding error for most companies. So if you can't start to move in this much faster, this is why I really talk about this agile way of working and sort of your time to value reducing to weeks in like 3 to 6 weeks. If you're not doing that, then you're setting yourselves up for failure, because the 10 million, here's a spoiler alert if you read the book, the $10 million ROI never comes. The business cases are built on faulty logic. So and I go into great detail because it gets back to this P2P. The P2P is where you get the efficiencies, but not the benefits, and the source to contract is where you get the benefits, but it never materializes in the P2P. So anyway.
Yeah. So I think we have like 2 or 3 minutes left on the clock. Maybe we'll take up this question real quick. So this is from Ben
Yeah.
Laker. How big is the gap between technology for goods procurement vis-a-vis technology for services procurement?
Yeah. So goods is decent. It's not as advanced as everybody thinks it is. So there's a lot more work to do in goods, but it is more mature.
Mm.
Services has been largely untouched, but but the technology, a lot of the startups focus on services, and we're starting to see some real sophistication there. So that's one piece. And then the other piece is that I just did if you follow me on LinkedIn, there's a couple of podcasts I've done recently where legal and marketing and sort of these hard to tackle categories, and now IT services, we can do those, we can tackle those. So those are no longer off limits. And so I would say that services procurement, if you're looking at that, really exciting stuff. And even on goods procurement, not as mature as it needs to be. So think about MRO as a category, and even direct materials, especially in an inflationary market. There are digital solutions to apply to both sides to advance those capabilities, because on neither side are we where we need to be, but this is the moment where there's great solutioning.
Okay, I think we can maybe one last question, Eloise, before we close out. I know we're completely out of time. Is your so this is from Nu Wang. Is your focus of your book on digital procurement for direct or indirect goods?
Both. It's both. And I talk about this disconnect. And yeah, but I'm very attentive to both because I work across geographies and across industries. So I'm very attuned to that. And when you talk about platforms, platforms should enable both, and user experience should enable both. So the short answer, because we're at time, is it is both.
Yeah. I think for any of you who are interested, in fact, I would personally recommend to just read the book because it's an excellent read. It's not a typical business book, I would say. It's from the heart, and Eloise has in fact distilled some of her experiences, and she gives a very clear-cut vision as to where the procurement technology is heading to. I'm afraid we have run out of time completely. Thank you so much, Eloise. That was a very insightful session on procurement digitalization. We received several more interesting questions I can see now, but unfortunately, we have run out of time. We will try and reply by email to the questions perhaps that were not answered in today's sessions. This marks the end of our session. A big thank you to all the participants for logging in today. Uh, and some of you have asked, yeah, we will be sharing the webinar recording with all our participants soon. Please do reach out to the email address on the screen if you have any additional questions. Thank you, Eloise. Thank you so much. Have a good day. And to all those in Asia, good night.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.